He is one of the most underappreciated presidents in US history, and his legacy is shrouded in mystery. But not because there's some kind of conspiracy to hide it, but rather there's just a lack of education and general knowledge about the time period in which he was president. Coolidge is Amity Shlaes' biography of the 30th President of the United States. My name is Grant, welcome to GH Books, and this is a book review. Most people have never heard of Calvin Coolidge, and the few who may recall the name mostly do so from some class about the Roaring Twenties, and I remember my own high school history teacher referred to him as one of the do-nothing trio of the 1920s that led to the Great Depression. Shlaes gives a very interesting and entertaining biography of Calvin Coolidge. One of the stories about him is about how quiet he is, and this is probably one of the more widely known stories of Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin Coolidge has this reputation for being very quiet, and he's at a dinner party. This woman who is seated near him says, "I bet I can get you to say more than 2 words by the end of the night." Calvin Coolidge responds by saying, "You lose," and then he doesn't say a word for the rest of the night. This, along with many other instances similar to that, is what got him the nickname Silent Cal. According to the author, Coolidge took finances very seriously. Whenever he received money from anybody, not just financial institutions but even from friends and family, he treated every cent of it as a loan and promised to eventually repay it back, of which he eventually did. Calvin Coolidge treated debt like the plague. In fact, he felt so strongly about this that when he became president upon the death of Warren Harding, he didn't even own a house. He was living in an apartment with his wife as Vice President of the United States. But when he became president, he decided to continue a lot of Warren Harding's policies, which are mostly cutting taxes and cutting spending. These policies helped bring the United States out of a depression that had occurred after World War I. And this wasn't just a recovery, this was a vast economic expansion. So much so that despite cutting taxes, the amount of revenue that came into the federal government increased. Calvin Coolidge was a bit morally perplexed by this, because he believed that the government shouldn't be taxing you any more than what is absolutely necessary to pay for what they're doing. But every time he cut taxes and cut spending, revenue increased because the economy kept growing. And so it eventually took his Secretary of the Treasury to convince him to use this money, of course, to pay off the national debt. And he also used it to lower taxes even further, which resulted in an increase in the amount of revenue on top of what was already there. It was also during Coolidge's presidency where all Native Americans residing in the United States were granted US citizenship. And so, if Coolidge seems so great, why don't we hear more about him today? My guess is that the Great Depression of the next decade really overshadowed his accomplishments, and there are also left-wing historians who want to blame him for the stock market crash of 1929. However, I don't buy that. The stock market crash was probably more a result of bad Federal Reserve policy. And Coolidge saw the crash coming, and he saw it as a necessary market correction. However, macroeconomic reality doesn't ease the concerns of those with microeconomic needs. The author of this book also wrote The Forgotten Man, so why don't you click this annotation here so you can take a look at that review as well. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and keep reading.